Here in our final lesson on ransomware, let's think about, in this section, we've reviewed the business model of ransomware, initial access, data exfiltration, and the encryption phase itself. So now we want to step back and examine the bigger picture. Let's think a bit more about why ransomware succeeds despite massive defensive investments, how attackers continue evolving their tactics, and the future of this threat. Understanding why ransomware remains so highly effective despite billions spent on cybersecurity defenses helps us understand better fundamental challenges in security. First, there's asymmetry of effort. Defenders must protect every system, account, and entry point continuously. Attackers only need to succeed once. Next, there's economic incentive alignment. Ransomware is extraordinarily profitable. Then there's geographic safe haven protection. Attackers operate from jurisdictions that don't prosecute cybercrime against foreign targets. Fourth, there's technical complexity. Modern IT environments are vast, complex, and constantly changing. And fifth, there's the human factor. Technical defenses cannot overpower the significance of human fallibility. Organizations face impossible trade-offs in defending against ransomware. Maximum security would mean minimal functionality. Every functional capability creates potential attack vectors. Remote access enables remote work, but also creates entry points for attackers. Cloud services provide collaboration and a lot of other features, but also expand the attack surface. Third-party integration enables business processes but creates supply chain risks. Organizations have to balance security with functionality, and that balance always leaves some vulnerability that patient attackers can identify and exploit. Even with sophisticated security and detection tools, detecting ransomware preparation before encryption is extremely difficult. As we mentioned many times, they are often using legitimate tools that are working to blend in. On top of this, security tools generate enormous volumes of alerts, most of which are false positives. Security teams are daily struggling to identify meaningful signals indicating actual compromise amongst the noise. Alert fatigue leads to missed warnings. Detecting data exfiltration is particularly challenging when attackers are using legitimate cloud services, transferring data gradually over weeks or months or years, and encrypting transfers to prevent content inspection. Encryption creates unique pressure that other cyber attacks don't. This immediate visible crisis creates psychological pressure that leads to ransom payments. The combination of immediate crises, business disruption costs exceeding ransom demands, uncertain recovery timelines, and double extortion data publication threats creates a perfect storm of pressure. Organizations invest heavily in backups, and unfortunately that isn't sufficient. Attackers specifically target and destroy backups during reconnaissance phases. Restoration from backups takes time. The business disruption during restoration still creates enormous costs. And backups don't address data theft and publication threats. Extortion pressure to prevent data disclosure still exists, even with perfect backups. Not to mention the fact that backups only work if they're actually functional. Unfortunately, many organizations don't discover until they're in the crisis that their backups are incomplete, corrupted, or weren't thoroughly tested, and they don't actually restore properly. Backups are only one component of defense. They're not a complete solution. And we have cyber insurance, like we talked about. It both helps and harms the ransomware problem. And then premiums are rising dramatically as ransomware claims increase. Some organizations cannot even afford adequate coverage, and then some insurers are excluding ransomware coverage or capping the payments. The insurance-ransomware relationship is complex and evolving. Ransomware tactics continue evolving to maintain effectiveness as defenses improve. Triple and quadruple extortion, adding DDoS attacks, third-party pressure, targeting of cloud infrastructure and SaaS applications, focusing on supply chain attacks, compromising managed service providers to reach multiple clients simultaneously, increasing targeting of operational technology and industrial control systems in manufacturing and critical infrastructure. Every defensive improvement prompts offensive adaptation. and the evolution will continue indefinitely. And as we've learned, operations for ransomware are increasingly resembling legitimate businesses. They have organizational structures, specialized roles. They're conducting market research, pricing research. They provide customer service to their victims. They maintain brand reputation, and they offer service-level agreements promising decryption. Some operations even have HR departments recruiting affiliates, PR departments managing their public image, and finance departments laundering payments. This professionalism indicates ransomware has matured from opportunistic crime into heavily organized criminal enterprises with long-term business strategies. To make it even more complex, some ransomware operations have nation-state connections, blurring the lines between criminal activity and state-sponsored operations. North Korea uses ransomware as revenue generation for the regime. Russian intelligence services are believed to tolerate or support ransomware operators targeting Western countries. Other nations may use ransomware for strategic purposes disguised as criminal activity. And what do you want to bet? That most of the governments aren't involved in terms of including cybercrime of various sorts and potentially including ransomware as part of their national state protection and offensive planning. Now, the state involvement provides attackers with resources, intelligence capabilities, and protection that purely criminal operations wouldn't have. It also complicates responses since traditional law enforcement approaches don't apply to state-sponsored operations. There's a relevant observation from the economist Milton Friedman. He said in various speeches, if you put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand. Friedman was talking about government inefficiency, but his observation applies more broadly to complex system management. The larger and more complex a system becomes, the more difficult it is to manage effectively. Modern IT environments have become so large and complex that comprehensive security is genuinely difficult even for well-resourced organizations. Thousands of systems, millions of configurations, constant change, human users with varying security awareness. Ransomware succeeds partly because the systems being defended are so complex that perfect defense is impossible. Every component, configuration, and user represents potential vulnerability. Attackers only need to find one exploitable weakness in this vast complexity. The complexity that enables business functionality also creates security vulnerability. This tension is fundamental and unresolvable. Ransomware increasingly targets critical infrastructure with devastating potential consequences. These various attacks create risks beyond financial harm. Some ransomware groups publicly claim they won't target healthcare or critical infrastructure, attempting to avoid government retaliation. Others specifically target these sectors, knowing they cannot afford downtime. Whether to pay ransom remains intensely debated, with compelling arguments on both sides. Solid arguments against paying and solid arguments for paying. Different organizations in different circumstances reach different conclusions. There's no accepted, universally correct answer, and this reflects the genuine ethical and practical complexity of the decision. Law enforcement faces significant limitations in combating ransomware. Attackers operate from foreign countries, foreign jurisdictions beyond direct law enforcement reach. Law enforcement successes like the takedown of Revil, arrests of individual operators, these things are notable, but they don't eliminate the problem. Other groups just fill the void. The decentralized ransomware as a service model means disrupting one operation doesn't stop ransomware overall. International cooperation is limited by geopolitical tensions. Countries harboring attackers often won't cooperate with Western law enforcement. If this country is not friends with that country, then their likelihood of cooperating on anything is always diminished, right? Organizations are developing more sophisticated defense approaches beyond traditional prevention. Assume breach mentality, recognizing prevention will eventually fail. Focus on detection during the pre-encryption dwell time. Network segmentation, limiting attackers, lateral movement. zero trust architectures that don't automatically trust users or systems, immutable backups that attackers can't modify or delete. There's a lot of different ways that organizations need to approach this and things that you would need to discuss with your IT departments. Being proactive is helpful. Do threat hunting in your organization, actively searching for compromise indicators rather than waiting for the alerts. Be prepared with your incident response planning and regular practice so that when something happens, simply fall back to the procedures and do that instead of allowing the organization to be forced into that emotional chaos. These approaches acknowledge that perfect prevention is impossible and help focus on how to deal with at least limiting attacker success even after initial compromise. There's the old saying, there are two types of companies, the ones that have been compromised and the ones that don't yet know they've been compromised. Governments are implementing regulations attempting to combat ransomware. Some jurisdictions are considering or implementing bans on ransom payments. Others require disclosure of ransomware attacks and payments. Critical infrastructure sectors face additional security requirements and oversight. The various regulatory approaches being worked on face challenges. Banning payments might increase operational harm when organizations cannot restore quickly. Disclosure requirements create liability concerns, and sanctions are difficult to enforce against foreign actors. The regulatory environment continues evolving as governments struggle with how to address the ransomware threat. Ransomware will likely remain a significant threat for years to come. The economic incentives remain strong. The technical capabilities of both attackers and defenders continue advancing. New attack vectors emerge as technology evolves. Cloud services, IoT devices, and operational technology present expanding attack surfaces. Attackers will continue innovating. They will come up with new extortion techniques, they will target emerging technologies, and they will increase their automation and efficiency, and they will use AI. Defenses will improve but won't eliminate the threat. The asymmetry favoring attackers is fundamental. Organizations should plan on ransomware remaining part of the threat landscape indefinitely, rather than expecting the problem to be solved. Because prevention is imperfect and ransomware will remain a threat, organizational resilience becomes critical. Resilience means having capabilities to detect attacks early, contain damage before it becomes catastrophic, recover operations rapidly with or without paying ransom, and maintain business continuity during incidents. Consider what kind of budget does your organization put into your technology sectors? Do you always run a lean team? Are you always barely getting by and putting all of your finances into other operational teams and not considering your IT department, your security, your cybersecurity departments as one of your most important aspects of keeping the business alive? That is a very common issue across the globe. It's money the organization doesn't want to pay, and it's difficult for them to understand that their ability to continue in operation depends on the strength of their cybersecurity posture and their IT infrastructure. There must be investment in detection and response capabilities, regular testing through tabletop exercises and simulations, documented incident response procedures practiced before crises, relationships with incident response vendors established in advance, and psychological preparation for the stress of actual incidents. Organizations that survived ransomware successfully are often not those that prevented every attack, but those that responded effectively when prevention failed. That's the end of our exploration of ransomware in this course, from the business model through initial access, data exfiltration, encryption, and the broader context of why this threat persists and evolves. It's organized criminal enterprise. The challenges involved are clear, and there's no silver bullet solution. Organizations must treat this as a persistent threat, requiring ongoing investment, attention, and adaptation rather than a temporary problem that will be solved and disappear. In our final section of this course, we're moving from ransomware to supply chain attacks, how attackers compromise trusted vendors, software providers, and service partners to reach their ultimate targets. This is a growing endeavor. Supply chain attacks are becoming more well known as an issue in modern society. So let's dive into understanding that in the next lesson.